The first thing you will notice about the main character in this manga is that he is not motivated in the least. He is so bored he falls asleep no matter the situation. Although this is presented as a joke on super energetic protagonists, it ends up making him boring in the eyes of most people. You can't even call it an uncommon, so the joke can be more memorable. Since other shonen like One Piece, Gintama and One Punch Man did the same gag with very aloof protagonists. It's not like there is no psychological aspect to it either, since they all get serious and fight for justice and friendship and all that during battle. It's more like Ueki belonging to the flat archetype, meaning he doesn't have to change, because he's fine the way he is now. It's everyone else around him who have to change, despite being 10 times more motivated than him. I prefer characters who learn and change, not static ones who only change everyone around them. The second thing you will notice is that despite Ueki being the protagonist, it is not his point of view we are following. Just like Luffy in One Piece, we never see his thoughts, we only see the reactions of those around him. This is done so there can be an excuse for info dumps. The reader can be told what is going on through the eyes of someone who doesn't know what is going on. It creates intrigue and makes the reader curious. The problem is that you first need to make the reader care about a character who is curious. If he is invested in the character, then he will wander along with that character. And guess what? The narrative gives you nothing to make you care about Mori. She is a typical girl with no special qualities. Chitanda in Hyoka was also a typical girl who was curious all the time, but she was drawn as a cute waifu that makes the Kummer audience to simp for her. Remember Lucy in the beginning of Fairy Tail? She was also curious to find out about the magic guilds, and she was constantly placed in compromising positions as an excuse for fan service. Mori has none of that. She's as blunt and flat-chested as it gets, so why would anyone care about her? Yes, she's not objectified, but having nothing as a character is not a better alternative. At one point she says she wants to protect the protagonist, and despite being serious about it, it felt like a lame joke. She has absolutely no talents and needs to be constantly rescued. There is nothing for the audience to believe she can be useful. She's just there to offer commentary during the fights. Later on this changes since she becomes involved in the fights, but by then she's just a member of Ueki's team, so anyone can take her place as the one who asks the questions. Thus, she wasn't handled well and there is nothing to make the audience care about what she represents. The premise of the story is very simple. 100 people with superpowers fight each other, and the winner becomes a god who can change reality. So yes, it's yet another tournament arc! There are no stakes in terms of injuries or death, so the story attempts to change that by giving Ueki a limited amount of times he can break the rules before losing all his talents and disappearing entirely. And it fails, since the narrative doesn't make a big fuss about it. Ueki doesn't care about it and he is constantly bored. In fact, he loses most of his talents by attacking bottom-tier bullies, so you're never made to believe he's afraid of dying. He just says he will try harder to manage without his talents, and that's the end of it. There is no sense of uniformity when it comes to the power system. Ueki is the only one who loses talents with every penalty, while none of his opponents ever lose anything. Why is Ueki the only one who has this weird limitation? For fake tension, that's why. Nobody ever dies or remains injured for long. It's yet another story where everyone gets constantly stabbed, punched, clapped and stamped with enough force to smash rocks, and they are perfectly fine a few seconds later. The mangaka added this just to make the reader be worried about Ueki, and it doesn't work because it applies only to him and he doesn't care about it. Furthermore, Ueki is clearly getting smacked around constantly yet never falls unconscious, while most of his enemies are defeated with one hit. This is clearly plot armor and takes away the tension from the fights, when you know he has infinite hit points while everybody else has a single heart. Like in pretty much every fighting shonen, the protagonist is not an average boy like you and me. They make him seem to be average at first, so you will find him relatable, and then they make him a special chosen one who is better than every mortal. He and a few others were chosen during birth to be sent to the mortal world, so they can easily win against all other candidates. Basically, the tournament is rigged. No mortal is meant to win. A bunch of people were chosen, given powers, promised godhood if they win, and were then tricked. It reminded me of what Roger did in the beginning of One Piece when he promised a great treasure to tens of millions of people, and said nothing about nobody is able to find the treasure if he's not the special chosen one, favored just by existing. So the protagonist came from heaven, and there is also hell in the story, but you hardly see them. The world building is a mostly plain-looking modern Japan without the typical celebrations they have there or even the otaku culture. In fact, sceneries end up being so unimportant. Whenever the mangaka wants to show a new area, like heaven or hell, it only takes up a tiny panel in the page. He doesn't care about the setting and thus doesn't trigger the imagination of the core audience, which is a huge deal in these sorts of stories. As a consequence to that, he also doesn't care about the interaction between the action and the environment. It's yet another series where nobody notices the supernatural fights that keep happening all around him. Basically, the characters don't affect the world, despite the premise being all about becoming a god who will change the world. That's right, not even the simplistic premise was handled well. You're supposed to give a shit about the fate of a world you never see and are thus never made to care about. More fake tension appears when Ueki gets his own Kurama, a giant beast that initially says he's going to eat him, but very soon becomes his friend. Because he doesn't have any friends and Ueki became his friend. Isn't the power of friendship lovely? On top of that, the beast becomes an excuse for Ueki to get more video game superpowers. He trains inside the beast in some sort of a time expansion chamber, where he gains a star power with which he unlocks new attacks. Like in a video game. This is how much the mangaka cared about the power system. And I have to mention the pacing, which is abysmal. The entire manga is 16 volumes, which is far from long. Despite that, it feels like it's going on forever because of the very simple and repetitive structure of Ueki waiting for an opponent to appear so they can fight. There is nothing else going on in terms of story, which for a person of plot like me, this means boredom. No matter how much they were trying to hype up the next battle as the most important event in the universe, I didn't care. The characters were all one-dimensional, they all had the same goal, nobody ever died or remained injured, and the game was rigged. Why would I care? And before anyone mentions Fist of the North Star or the tournament arc in Battle Angel Alita, which I like despite being nothing but fighting, everyone there was a badass, chopping people to pieces in a very well-drawn post-apocalypse. That is not what happens in Ueki. Everybody looks goofy, nobody dies, and the setting is completely featureless. There is simply no visual appeal. The artwork is very simple, the paneling is often basic, and even when the battles attempt to be creative and tactical, it's nothing that you won't find in One Piece or Naruto. There is simply nothing that Ueki does better than any of the popular manga out there. Anyways, Ueki wins the final battle because his dream was more powerful than the villain's dream, whatever the hell that means. He makes his wish, which is nothing important, because there is no world to bother with. He could not make a wish that involved it. Then he's finally rewarded for all his efforts by returning to school where he can continue to be bored and sleep through the rest of his life. Yep, that's the big reward for defeating 100 people, trashing a dozen locations, and becoming a god who can rewrite reality. Absolutely nothing. And you can clearly see how much he changed since the days he was an unmotivated boy sleeping all day in class. Not at all. That's what you get when all development is just video game abilities that have nothing to do with reality. So, was it really worth following for 16 volumes? Was the payoff amazing? Imagine how the fanboys would have reacted if this manga was popular. I imagine it wouldn't be civil. And that's all I had to say about Ueki. Not worth your time.